you can't accept it, let's just fight again. Although it'll turn out the same way. I'll put an end to this. Ultimate! To exceed one's limit is impossible without exerting an extraordinary amount of effort.
Alright guys, what is going on? Valk here. Today we just had probably the biggest stream in as far as my recent memory goes, in terms of new content and new releases. Within that, Smaoke now announced Hwayoung as well as Cat Armin as the new RGB5 and the ML4 coming up as summonable and playable heroes. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it and I'll give you guys my thoughts on the new releases and as well as how they could be played. Right off the bat, we have Hwayoung being a fire warrior in the Libra constellation. Just looking at her base stats, it's looking like she has one of those attack boosting passives, as similar to how Senya or Caesarea might have. She looks to be quite tanky without a lot of crit in her base stat to boost her damage. So let's just get into it and see what she's all about. So right off the bat, we see her passive Prairie Hawk makes it so that she can't crit. So this is always really interesting when we have a hero like this. She is going to have 35 to 50% increased attack depending on whether or not you put Molus into it. But instead of Senya, where 50% of the time she can't be crit, she just receives a flat 30% damage reduction from critical hits, very similar to how an LQC would function. On top of that, at the start of the battle at the end of the turn, grants her one barrier for one turn, and the strength of the barrier scales to her attack, which I think, as long as the numbers are good, she's going to make quite good use of it. But right off the bat though, from just seeing this barrier passive, this tells me she should be run on immunity, as well as very high defense and high attack to make use of the barrier. Very similar to how a carrot would, right? And the reason why you always run an immunity with these is that in a scenario where you're fighting against a one buff stripper, something like a F10E, something like a Sage Ball will only be able to strip one buff. So in that scenario, the barrier would be protecting the immunity, and this is definitely one of those heroes you want her to get her skill off the bat on the first turn. As far as her skill 3 goes, she dispels all debuffs and then attacks the enemy, granting herself immunity for 2 turns, penetrates the target's defense. So when it says this, right, it usually means penetrates the target's defense by 100%. And when the target's max health is greater than the caster's max health, damage increases proportional to the difference, up to 100%. And this immediately tells me that she's meant to be a tank buster, right? She's meant to just be able to kick in those Crimson Armin, those Troublemaker Crozet, perhaps even an A-Ravi or a Rule of Light here and there, right? Those heroes that usually are built with very high defense, very high HP, that's just very hard to get through. This combined with the fact that her S2 gives her a attack scaling barrier tells me she's one of those bruisers that's meant to be built with very high attack, very high defense, you know, decent speed, right? But very low HP, like Ervelyn, right? Which is the other hero with this exact text, but, you know, to a lesser degree. She's probably meant to be built with a little bit less HP and very contingent on just having her barrier up to sustain herself. As far as her damage goes, if we just look in the video, she does 19k to a Crimson Armin with attack up. Obviously, an attack up is quite a lot, but in the video, she only has 16k HP to, you know, around the Crimson Armin's 19k, which tells me that if she built less HP and more attack, there's a chance she might naturally be able to just one tap a Crimson Armin, if not come close to it. So I'm decently impressed with the numbers, but final judgments to be reserved until we actually see the number in the data mine and we see how she performs in game with the gear and with the Molas. Overall though, I think this skill hits quite hard and has some interesting implications in PvP, but I don't think she has enough in her kit to kind of take her over the edge where she's going to be a staple every single game. That being said, moving on to her S1. Attacks the enemy with a kick, increases combat readiness of caster by 10%, up to 15% with full skill up. If the caster is buff, inflicts additional damage proportionate to caster's attack regardless of whether the attack hits. There we go. This S1 is very interesting. From just looking at it, it looks like she's going to be able to gain CR off of her S1 attack, which makes it so that she's at least viable when played on counter set. So you can think of her S1 as something like a Stray's S1, where instead of being able to crit, as long as she has a buff, which she most likely will because she always gives herself a barrier, she is going to be able to just inflict extra damage all day. And in my mind, she's going to be played with Uberius Tooth as well. So if you do that, she's going to just inflict a lot of additional damage, especially if the attack doesn't hit, which actually gives her an extremely good matchup into something like Green Violet, where even if it doesn't hit, all of this extra damage coming through and non-critical damage, which means even on a miss, she's going to be able to retain more value than a hero who relies a lot on a crit. Being able to gain 15% combat readiness also means that she's quite viable on a counter set. So depending on your playstyle, I think she could be built on counter with immunity or even speed with immunity. And honestly, that's probably up to each player's playstyle as well as available gear to decide. And finally, we have her artifact, Indestructible Gators. This is one of those artifacts I'm not too impressed on. I think her kit is very interesting. I think she has a very unique aesthetic to her that hasn't been explored too much in E7, right? You know, we previously had heroes like Senya, like Gunther, right? But until I think Caesarea came out, right, we didn't have like a whole archetype for all of these characters that just have innately buffed attack but cannot crit. So with Hwayong, I think now we officially have at least 3 of them at 5-star and 2 of them at lower rarities. This officially gives us kind of like almost like an archetype of new heroes. Indestructible Gators is going to bring her 10% attack for free, and at max level, if she makes a non-crit attack with it, and there is a lot of qualifiers. 1, this attack cannot crit, and 2, it has to be a single attack. So this is almost not too usable on that many heroes. But what this is going to give her is a 100% chance to burn for 1 turn, which to me, honestly, it's not that great, especially when it can only be activated once per turn. I'm not too impressed, because her kit doesn't really allow her to build effectiveness, and since artifacts scale off of hero effectiveness, I don't think there's too many heroes that you want to inflict burn on that really takes advantage of this artifact. You might as well just do a little bit less damage, just using something like an Uberius Tooth, which is guaranteed and, you know, stacks with her passive. So overall, I think she'd probably just use Uberius's Tooth, and you could probably skip on Indestructible Gators. And if you really want to play a burn type build, just go Junkyard Dog. That thing is going to be the same value anyway mathematically. This is 100% chance to burn for 1 turn. Junkyard Dog gives you 50% chance to burn for 2 turns. So and Junkyard Dog is free, right? If you were here for the Guilty Gear collab, you got a max copy of that. So I don't think this is one of those artifacts that has to be like a must pull. But, you know, I'm definitely summoning for the hero. So if I hit one on the way, that thing's going right into storage. And one day if it does get buffed, like Merciless Glutton or something similar, hey, who knows? This might be useful. That being said, I think Hwayong is a very interesting hero. She's very cool, very well designed. The design is absolutely beautiful. So this is a pull if you like the hero design, which is honestly enough reason to pull for any hero in any gacha game, right? That's why we play these. I think she's an interesting hero if you're looking for good matchups versus tanky degen teams. You know, if you need to just be able to bust through a lot of tanky bruisers and you don't have better options for that, like for example, like a Strays, or maybe if you miss Rimuru, she's a good option. But otherwise, I don't think you should be summoning for her if you're expecting her to kind of change the game, for her to be a high tier, a hyper carry every game, or if you're expecting a hero like Peyra, where she can just single-handedly kind of swing the meta and equalize the C. Lilius advantage players have. I don't think she's that strong, but overall, she does seem like a very interesting hero. So with that being said, let's just move on to the next one.
Watch and learn, kitten. You and I are worlds apart. I'm the star of this show. The winner of this tournament is going to be me, 'cause I bought off all the judges.
All right, and up next, you know, we have Bad Cat Armin. This is a definitely interesting hero because from the get-go, it looks like her base stats is in a very similar position, albeit with a lot lower attack than Hwayong. She looks like she's meant to be a bruiser that gives attack or crit her to herself, but her attack is very low, so she might be an HP scaling bruiser. So This is probably the one of the most unique mechanics we've got within recent heroes. After being attacked, she has a 30% chance to up to 50% chance with Molus to give her frontmost ally crit damage buff for 1 turn before forcing that ally to counterattack. Attack cannot be triggered by extra attack or counter attacks. So I actually think this is a really interesting mechanic because on paper it sounds very, very strong. But in practice, right? How are you going to get your opponents, especially, for example, if you're playing Guild War or Arena, right? And they have all of these light units on defense. They have like an LQC, they have like maybe Golden Girls, they have Bellion. You can very reliably force this passive to activate. But in RTA, your opponent can just attack around Armin herself. But I do think she has a lot of potential when you pair her with stealthing hyper carries, for example, a Spectre Tenebria or a Landy. 2 heroes which I played quite a bit. So I'm very interested in pulling her and just testing with her and seeing what types of comp I can force with her to essentially kind of enable a hyper carry Landy or a hyper carry Stenny once again. All in all though, this does enable some pretty interesting playstyles. So if this has the ability to bring back something like a Landy first pick meta, I'd be pretty excited. Moving on. Her S3 attacks the enemy with a huge explosion, granting caster speed for 2 turns and a barrier to all allies for 2 turns. And damage dealt and barrier strength increases proportionate to caster's max health. Okay, so this is kind of where, this hero is meant to be built as an HP bruiser, and she's meant to be played decently fast. This kind of makes me excited because this is something that fits in my playstyle. I play a pretty fast playstyle, and I play a lot of Landy and Spectre Tenebria. So if I wanted to fit Cat Armin as a support, what she can do for me is basically enable my Landy or Spectre Tenebria. When I have these heroes, right, they're kind of a ticking time bomb where eventually at some point they're just going to be doing way too much damage to the enemy team. So they're going to be forced to draft AoE heroes to kind of respond to my stealth carries. And that's where the passive comes in. With this S3, usually with a very aggressive comps, you kind of have to skip out on mitigators, you have to skip out on taking more defensive utilities. And this provides that defensive utility, albeit it doesn't look super strong. But hey, you know, like if we're playing aggressively, we take what we can get. So I'm decently excited to see whether or not the utility and survivability she brings to a team can kind of help her sustain through maybe some slower teams. Speaking of slower teams, her S1 will inflict injuries up to 5% per enemy based on damage dealt, and when it's used on her turn, this turns into an AoE attack. So this definitely tells me this is one of those heroes that need to be built with like a crit chance neck, an HP ring, and speed boots. At the very least, that is going to be the most efficient way you'll get your stat distribution. So now this is looking like one of those heroes that's really going to accelerate aggressive games when you have a Landy or when you have a Spectre Tenebria and you're kind of against a lot of tankier opponents, right? Her S1 is going to help you chunk down some APOC Ravis, Ruels, maybe Crimson Armins, right? If your enemy tries to kind of combat your draft by drafting AoE heroes, you're going to be able to force your Landy or Stenny to just hit back. And over time, she looks like she's meant to be able to outvalue the enemy draft. So overall, I would say she's a pretty interesting hero, but she does seem very gear intensive because she is going to be needing a lot of stats just to maintain her high HP, crit chance, as well as speed, right? Just to make sure she cycles sufficiently. I think as far as team comps can be played, definitely can be played in very aggressive teams, perhaps with the Sea Lilius with redirect provoke. And if you want to make more value out of your redirect provoke, right, you can even take an F10 alongside Landy and your Spectre Tenebria. That way, she's the highest HP unit on your team. She's going to be forced into being attacked a lot. And when opponents attack her a lot and you have a hyper carry in your front slot, she's just going to pop off on them all day long. Overall though guys, I'm pretty excited about this patch. Those are my thoughts on the new heroes. Let me know down below if you think there's something I missed or if there's a combination that you thought of that I haven't. I'm pretty interested in pulling and testing these heroes. I think in terms of interesting mechanics, Cat Armin has some of the most interesting mechanics we've seen in a long time. And Hwayong seems very easy to enable, especially when it comes to using gear that no other heroes really want to touch. So that being said, that is a video for today. I am super hyped. And I hope you guys are too. Yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya. Hey Hey guys, thank you for watching. If you liked the video, make sure to drop me a like and subscribe. It would really help me out. If you want to catch any of these moments live, be sure to follow me at twitch.tv/Valkyria_. Also, catch me hanging out on my Discord, link in description. For now, I'll catch you guys in the next video. See ya.